I don't want to detain us here, Rania. I know we have another guest waiting for us, and it is a very, very important issue, and that is just this massive expansion of immigration and detention and enforcement. And, I don't know, it's been expanding, but it just feels like it's hyper accelerating. So to help us put this all in context and perspective, we are super, super honored to be joined here on the show once again by Todd Miller, who's an author and a journalist specializing in border issues and also the host of the Border Chronicle. Todd, as always, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Well, Todd, maybe I guess in some ways, some perspective here. I mean, obviously I've been reading about, they've asked for, I think, this $45 billion for increased detention. I read a wild article the other day in the Texas Observer about the recruitment of these like local police to like an ICE army, as they were calling it. I mean, is this a rapid acceleration and expansion, or is it maybe more a piece of what we've seen over the past several decades with so-called border security?
Well, both. I mean, both. A bit of both to it. Yeah. On one hand, yeah, the when you like looking at the Trump era, which is what is it, 3 months? It's only been here about 3 or 4 months at this point. It's important, to think of it and look at it and frame it that one, Trump will come in. He has a flair for the dramatic. He's going to say things that are hyperbolic at times. In the mainstream media coverage of border and immigration enforcement goes from zero to a lot. So like keeping that all in context versus what's really happening. And that's what I, somebody like working at the Border Chronicle, that's what I attempt to do, is try to parse all these tentacles that seem to be going off in multiple directions. And there's a lot of truth to what we're seeing with an expansion of an immigration and border enforcement apparatus that's been expanding incrementally now for, as you mentioned, Eugene, decades. There's been decades of this. The Biden administration in 2024 had the largest border and immigration enforcement budgets ever. So got to keep that in mind. But when you think about, for example, training police, sheriff's departments in different counties in what are called 287G agreements. These are agreements between ICE and police forces. They have been around for quite a while. When Trump took office, there was 100 and something, I can't remember the exact number, but 130 or something like that, 287G agreements. They've accelerated now to over 500. So that's the quadrupled these agreements, basically deputizing police to do immigration enforcement. That's how you can look at that really simply, right? There was a bill that passed today, this morning in the House. It has to go through the Senate, but it's calling for something like $150 billion over the next 4 years for border and immigration enforcement that will be infused into the annual budgets. And if this happens, it will probably close to double the budgets. And what they're proposing is finishing the border wall. Right now, there's about 700 miles on the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border. So I guess they're talking about finishing the rest of it. Bringing in all kinds of layers of technology has been done for years and years. Hiring new Border Patrol agents, increasing ICE detention significantly, increasing the capacity to deport people. And that, with a capacity to deport, you have to look at the 287G agreements in that light as well, because if this mass removal or this mass deportation that Trump has been talking about since his campaign, if he's actually going to do it, these are the things that he needs to do to be able to do that. So I keep looking at that, and when I see these kind of like really concrete things like a budget or the number of agreements, then I'm like, okay, there is something happening here. There's an expansion above and beyond what we had before.
It's really, really alarming. And, you've covered the evolution of this, and I do want to get to the evolution of it a bit, Todd. But I want to ask you if you could talk a bit about ICE. Because, you've been covering border issues for years and years and years. You've written books about it, and a big part of that has been immigration and customs enforcement. You've seen their behavior specifically at the southern border with Mexico, and just the very fascistic way they behave. And they seem to be operating now. They did before, but now more so with just absolute impunity. Even, going so far as to, and this is quite a significant new development, going after elected officials. So they're being used by somebody who's in charge of the Republican Party, who's the president, Donald Trump, to literally go after his political adversaries. And I'm not saying this because I love Democrats and like, oh my God, this is like a civil war on Democrats. It's just to say that that's a really new and scary development, to be using this policing force against political adversaries, in addition to this sort of impunity that we're seeing, and just complete lack of accountability with their behavior, like being masked, not identifying themselves, literally disappearing people off the streets, breaking into people's homes and cars on video. So I guess, what does this say about the sort of growing lawlessness, if that's the right word to use, of federal immigration enforcement? And this kind of erosion of democratic norms. And it didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't just start, a few months ago when Trump came into office. This has been building and documented for a while and warned about.
Yeah, it sure has. And like you say, Rania, the targeting of political adversaries, like arresting officials, that sort of thing, that is another step above and beyond what we've seen before. I remember at the end of the last Trump administration in 2020, when there were protests around the country after George Floyd, and in Portland, unmarked vehicles of this was Border Patrol. So Border Patrol and ICE, let's just be clear, they work hand in hand with each other. They came in without plainclothes, and they snatched activists right off the streets, and detained them without people knowing who they were. So there is a precedent to this sort of thing happening. Obviously, with undocumented people crossing through the borderlands, happens all the time. The practice is there, right, of snatching people out of the streets, going to people's homes and grabbing them and taking them and separating them from families. But we're at a new level, and ICE itself, I look at, you have Customs and Border Protection, which is in charge of the borderlands, which is, you have to consider the borderlands 100 miles inland, right? So the 100-mile zone that surrounds the entire United States. And then ICE does the operations. They're like the internal Border Patrol, if you can put them in that way. They do not wear uniforms. They do not wear uniforms. This is one of the huge, they do not travel around in cars that are marked. They have been for the entire existence since 2003, this sort of undercover, underground, but out there institution or agency that really they're designed to go and, like I said just earlier, go into even people's homes at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning, like a military unit, and just grab people out of their homes in front of their children. They do this all the time. So the fact that they're now translating this to maybe Trump's political adversaries or elected officials that are against what Trump is doing is it's not a surprise, in the sense that is what they do. And I'm interested, to see and we should say also activists, right? Anybody who's involved with Palestine, for example, you watch out if you're involved in Palestine and you leave the country and you come back, or that sort of thing, because people involved with anything to do with Palestine liberation are being targeted by the immigration apparatus, and ICE particularly. So I don't know. It's worth just keeping an eye on, but these are some developments that are shocking.
And, before we let you go, Todd, I also was hoping you could give us some context on the military role here, because, I know they passed this thing and there's like the strip along the border, and military's maybe gained some new rights or whatever that may be. But I don't know, to me, it seemed very vague. So, it seemed sinister, but it was a little hard to parse.
Yeah, so the Trump administration declared that the border zone, which is called the Roosevelt Reservation. It's a buffer zone, like a 65-foot buffer zone right along the international boundary inland. They've declared that a military zone. It turns out that it's actually more than the 65 feet. It's going further in. And by a military zone, it becomes like a military base. So in parts of the border, it's so I should say this is right now it's been implemented on the 170 miles of border between New Mexico on the New Mexico border, New Mexico border, and a portion of Texas. That's where it is right now. Supposedly these zones are considered military bases. So with supposedly there's no trespassing signs. I say supposedly because I went and looked at the New Mexico one myself last week, and I didn't see any signs. I didn't even see any military. But that's the claim that's happening. So if you cross the border, like say you're a person crossing the border, and you cross into a military zone, you're breaking a trespassing law. That's what they're saying, and then you can be arrested with a felony charge. If you're also just a person like a journalist as well, like myself, and you cross into this militarized zone, you could also be given a no trespassing charge because you're going into a military base. So it seems it just happened a month ago. Like a lot of these tentacles of the Trump administration, there's a lot more bite than bark. They did try to charge, I think, like 200 people crossing into New Mexico with a no trespassing charge. It was dismissed by a judge saying that how could they possibly know there's not enough signs? But overall, we're going into, again, going into decades of border militarization and almost a new, if they're to turn that border zone into military bases, we're looking at a new phase of border militarization on top of a very militarized zone as it has been incrementally built up over the last 2 decades. In fact, like you look at the 100-mile zone, and the border isn't a 100-mile zone. Some people say it's a constitution-free zone or a constitution-mangled zone because your Fourth Amendment rights not to be searched nor seized are exempt, as one Border Patrol official put it to me one time. And Border Patrol can stop you or put up checkpoints and that sort of thing. And you can already see evidence of deep militarization. So this would be just another layer upon that. It again, like a lot of the stuff, it remains to be seen what actually happens.
Absolutely. Well, a lot to keep following, a lot to see, a lot about all of this, and we will continue to follow it. And thankfully, we have you, Todd Miller, following it at the Border Chronicle, where you are the host. And thanks, as always, for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.